Today we're going to talk about false confessions as one source of wrongful convictions in the criminal justice system. We will review the history of police interrogations, highlight some high-profile cases, and discuss why false confessions still occur. What is a police interrogation? In simple terms, it is the interview and questioning of suspects in a criminal case, generally by the police, although sometimes by prosecutors. What is the concern about them? The concern is that techniques to extract a confession from suspects and the voluntariness of those confessions. The Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution prohibits self-incrimination. Based on this amendment, anyone can tell the police they do not wish to talk. But most people do. Despite this amendment, there were no limits on police interrogation techniques until 1936. Physical beatings and torture were not uncommon to coerce a confession before 1936. Right? The Wickersham Commission report, very famous report on the state of law enforcement in the United States, and it was published in 1931. And one area of the report that got a lot of attention was the pervasive police brutality that the commission found. In 1936, in Brown versus Mississippi, the United States Supreme Court for the first time prohibited the use of confessions and information obtained through physical force. In this case, 3 black men were whipped with belts until they confessed to every detail of a crime. However, the police were still able to employ what was commonly called at the time the third degree. What did that involve? Keeping suspects awake for 40 hours at a time, starvation, not feeding suspects, the use of bright lights, restricting bathroom access, and threatening the loved ones of the suspects. These techniques were banned, but not until the 1960s. Police started using polygraphs around the early 1960s when they became available. And researchers found that they're only about 59% reliable. The police would use polygraphs and then lie to the suspects by telling them that they failed it and that they needed to come clean. Now, most states have banned the practice of using polygraphs for criminal suspects. Miranda versus Arizona was a watershed Supreme Court case. The Supreme Court decided in this case for the first time that police officers must inform suspects of their constitutional rights before beginning a custodial interrogation. They found in this case that confessions must be made freely and voluntarily. The Miranda warning was created as a result of this case. And that includes, and I think most of you probably know, the right to remain silent. Anything said after the Miranda warning can be used against them in court. They have the right to an attorney. They do not need to answer any questions from the police before an attorney arrives. If they cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided by the state. But when might these Miranda warnings not be effective? There have been several high-profile cases that include false confessions that have occurred after the Miranda case was decided. Why do false confessions continue to happen? Pause this video and go to the discussion board to give us your thoughts. All right, let's talk about some of these high-profile cases of false confessions. In Central Park 5, 5 Hispanic teens confessed to raping Tricia Millay in 1989. They served 6 to 13 years each in prison. DNA revealed that there was a single assailant. The suspects dealt with hours of isolated interrogation. The confessions that were collected were inconsistent with the facts of the case, and there was no DNA evidence, at least that the police could obtain or use against them. In Chicago's Inglewood Ford, this is a 1995 false confession to a gang rape and murder of Nina Glover. Police lied to and manipulated the suspects in the case. They were convicted and spent 14 years in prison before DNA evidence exonerated them. In the Harlem Park 3 case, there were 3 black teens who were convicted of killing a student at Harlem Park High School. The motive in this case? Stealing a Letterman's jacket. The defendant's mother produced a receipt for the purchase of his jacket. And eyewitnesses put them at the scene in this case, but they later recanted their testimony, saying they were threatened and intimidated by the police. All right, the National Registry of Exonerations tracks exonerations related to false confessions, and they've been doing this since 1989. They track exonerations of all types, and really this registry of people has mostly come about as the result of new techniques in DNA evidence and collecting and using that evidence in cases where there was a question as to the suspect's guilt. So they've been at work on this since 1989. There have been a large number of exonerations that have occurred since that time. But in terms of false confessions, they have found that false confessions are implicated in 34% of exonerations of all minors. A full third of exonerations of minors included false confessions. 54% of exonerations of minors under the age of 15 were a result of false confessions, so it especially impacts younger kids. And then 69% of exonerations of people with a mental illness or intellectual disability occurred as a result of false confessions. Let's look at the case of juveniles in a little more detail. Many juveniles do not have a sufficient reading level to understand Miranda. Moreover, the brain development of juveniles creates very real impediments to understand and assert their rights in custodial interrogations. 70% of adjudicated youth have a mental health issue that impairs cognition and have IQ scores in the bottom 25 percentile. According to recent research, Black and Hispanic youth are less likely to understand their rights, and their parents are less likely to assert those rights. All right, what is the current status of interrogations and the law? The voluntariness of the confession is decided in courts by what is called the totality of the circumstances. What is that? It includes personal characteristics like age, education, and mental health. It also includes the circumstances of the interrogation itself, the advice of constitutional rights, length of detention, repeated and prolonged questioning, and the deprivation of food or sleep. All right, so notably, the courts continued to allow deceit, lying to the suspect, Police can claim to have evidence that they do not have. They can threaten parents with having children placed in foster care. They can insinuate they will raid a grandparent's house. All of these examples were adjudicated in real court cases. For much of police history, there were no limits on interrogations. There were no limits on what the police could do to obtain a confession, despite the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. It was not until 1936 that beatings and torture of suspects were prohibited by the courts. High-profile cases that have occurred after the Miranda decision and the registry of exonerations highlight the problems with interrogations. The techniques of interrogation have improved in an effort to reduce false confessions, but deceit is still allowed.